My audio. Hi for the 3 participants that just popped in. We're just getting started with Danielle. So, hang on.
Thank you. And thank you for doing this via Zoom.
Like, if you just share the screen, right, it should be okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. We think we know what we're doing, so hang tight, everyone.
Hi, Maggie. Come on. Hello, Mike.
How are you today?
Hang in there. We have I think we have the Zoom meeting set up. Maybe we could just see with our participants and see if we can see anything.
Yeah, I'm just getting that.
It's all great for you.
How do I make this? There we go. Screen 2.
You just know. Well, and big fire.
Those who are virtual, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah, they're on there, and then that will progress it.
All right, we'll just say.
So then do you need me to record, or it is recording?
It's
okay.
recording, yeah. So,
Okay.
Thank you for your patience. We're just trying to get this set up. Bill. All right. We could do a chapter business after. Are you gonna do chat? I was thinking maybe we could do chapter business after, so Danielle could get started.
Are you ready to start?
Yeah,
I am, but it doesn't matter to me.
Joanne, you want to introduce?
Do you have something?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I will introduce her. So this is Danielle Bell, the owner of Native Roots Design. Did I get that right? Yeah. Yeah. I love Danielle because she specializes in native plants with her landscaping, and I've actually been really lucky. I got her when she was just starting, and I had 2 designs made for my yard and for the farm, and I'm happy with those designs. And of course, I still haven't gotten to executing those plans, but that's, that'll wait. But just I think if there's anything else to say about Danielle. She's a mother of 2 children. I know that. She dropped off my second design when she was starting to go into labor with her. Oh, sorry. No, I was just very pregnant. No, but she's very dedicated. So yeah, and she's here today to talk to us about building habitat with host plants, and I'm really happy to have her here today. So thank you all for coming. Thank you.
All right. Yes, thank you, Joanne. Thank you guys for having me. This is going to be an exciting one for me because I love plants, but I also love the things that use them. So the insects. So this is going to be talking about how can we, planting native plants are great, but how can we kind of strategically use specific plants to really bolster the habitat value of them and build habitat. So we're going to be talking about host plants and keystone species. So I got a couple quotes here just to really drive home the point and why we want to do this. So 96% of terrestrial birds depend on insect species provided by keystone plants. So we'll get into digesting that quote and explaining it a little bit more if this is new to you. But everybody loves birds. I think that's kind of why people get into a lot of landscaping is because they want to provide for birds and insects or birds and pollinators and bees and stuff. But we're going to go into even further why we need to and how we can attract those birds to our properties. So of those insects, 90% of those eat plants that are very specific to them. So they've, through evolution, have evolved these relationships with specific plants. If it's a native insect, it's usually a native plant that they need to complete their life cycle. So in order to get those birds, we need to have those insects. In order to have those insects, we need to have those native plants. And this is what our yard should look like. Filled with a lot of different diversity, a lot of different blooms, a lot of different habitat.
Can you comment about how you got into this?
Oh, yeah, sure. So a little background on me. I grew up in Beaver Dam, which is just north of Madison. Grew up outdoor kid, did a lot of weeding for my mother and grandmothers. And so I spent a lot of time outside in the summer. That was a daily chore that I had to do. And just loved doing it. Went to school for design, for residential and building design, and decided, it just wasn't right for me. I needed to be outside. So I got a second degree in conservation, got a little more knowledge on our natural landscapes, and got exposed to invasive species and all of that fun, semi-depressing things that we've done as humans and brought over and spread. And then just started doing restoration work with a couple different landscape companies and learned the plants that way and was like, we can bring these into our home landscapes. And last year was a decade that I had my house and have been transforming my yard. And that's where a lot of these pictures come from, is that experiment, that playing around and finding the plants and bringing them in and just seeing how much life came back. So in 2019, I started Native Roots, went out on my own. Wild Ones have been very supportive of me, and I'm really appreciative of that. Gave some talks and presentations and started building up clientele, and yeah, just been riding the roller coaster since then. I think I came in at a really good time. Doug Tallamy was, I feel like he's been struggling to speak the good word and get people to bite on it and understand it. So I feel like I got in at a good time, and people are really starting to care more, which is really nice because it makes selling my work a lot easier.
Was that your yard that we were just looking at?
This was not my yard. You'll see other pictures of my yard in here. This was a client that we did. This is probably on its third year. So yeah, this was all buckthorn. It was a buckthorn hedge. They had done a little bit of native landscaping on their own MMSD, which is the Milwaukee Metro Sewer District. They do a lot of plant sales with native plants and encourage people. So they had done some planting with those plants that they purchased through them. But this was the portion that we did. So yeah, this was all buckthorn. We cut it down, treated all the stumps, smothered it with cardboard and mulch, planted it in the spring, and here we have it a couple years later. So host plants. How many people know what host plants are or have heard the term? Okay, good. So these are very specific relationships. This is a giant swallowtail caterpillar on prickly ash. So sometimes you might think something looks like bird poop. Take some patience, watch it. It might start moving. Good camouflage. Nobody wants to eat that. So host plants have very specific relationships with our insects, specifically Lepidoptera. So that's our butterfly and our moths. So these are usually genus specific, sometimes species specific. So sometimes they will only feed on one specific plant. So think Cardinal blue butterfly needs the blue lupin. So those relationships, if they don't have those plants in their area, you are not going to complete their life cycle. So these are just a couple examples. Monarch is another good one, but instead of just one species that monarchs will feed on, it's the whole genus Asclepias. So some of them are a little bit easier to provide for, other ones are a little more specific. So these are just a couple of them. Again, these are all photos mostly from my yard, if not a couple clients' yards.
Danielle, can we get up your lists?
It's being recorded, so
Okay.
I think you should be able to go back and watch it.
I'm going to try to take.
Yes, otherwise I can send Joanne a PDF version too,
Okay.
if that's easier. It might be a big file, but and so this is the American lady. So these are ones that I had seen flying around my yard as adults. So these are butterfly, very showy, very beautiful. This was actually a photo from a client's property, but we planted, this is Pearly Everlasting. Kind of an aggressive plant for a small landscape, but she had goutweed that we were trying to smother. So fight invasives with aggressive natives. But we planted this in the spring, and by the summer, we already had caterpillars on it. So they move fast. They can find these species very quickly because their offspring and their livelihood depends on it. This is another really fun one that I had read a blog article about it, and I was like, I'm never gonna see that. I found it in my yard. This is the camouflage loper. Wavy lined emerald is the adult. And I had seen the adult, and then the next year I started seeing the caterpillar. So their camouflage, instead of looking like bird poop, they will actually pick flower petals and glue them to their back. So the main reason I saw this one is because he came off of a pale prairie clover and then moved to a yellow-headed or gray-headed coneflower. So he stood out because he hadn't switched his camouflage yet, but his counterpart underneath had. So that was just really cool to see these little delicate interactions. This is the fun stuff that I get really excited about, finding these relationships and these interactions. Columbine has a specific relationship with the dusty wing. This adult was from a different, I think that was like a camping trip that I found. So we have these native relationships with native insects, but we also have some pests. So the Columbine sawfly will also decimate the Columbine plant. That is not a native. It's not a true butterfly, or it's almost more like a wasp when it's in an adult phase. So sometimes when you see a lot of things nibbling on your plants, it does benefit to look at it because it might be an invasive. And usually when it's an invasive, they're completely defoliating your plants, where native insects usually don't completely decimate. That doesn't always happen, but sometimes, it's just important to notice that there can be non-natives and pests in the landscape that we want to keep an eye on too. And of course, the monarch butterfly, always a great one to find. This was probably, one of the reasons I went native was to plant for these, and I put milkweeds in, and like the first year I had so many caterpillars. And I was like, yes, this is awesome. Eating on everything. But they're not the only insects that can use milkweeds. So this slide and a couple other slides will show all the other insects that will utilize milkweeds in the landscape. So when we plant for specific interactions, we can also support for other insect and other wildlife. So it's not just the monarchs that are going to benefit from planting milkweed. It's going to be all of these other adult butterflies. It's going to be beetles. It's going to be some aphids. It's going to be bees. The leaf cutter bees in my yard are always on the milkweed. Hardly ever do I see them on other plants, but the nectar source of milkweeds is really, really beneficial to them. And here's just more. There's wasps that go after it. The red admiral butterfly, there's plant bugs, the Virginia creeper. So one funny thing or interesting thing about milkweeds is their pollen is not like a dust. It is in little sacs called pollina, and they're very sticky. And I've seen bees with them stuck to their toes. And that sphinx moth, I thought it was a leaf. I was like, why is there a leaf dangling from one of my plants? So I went out to investigate, as one always does. And it had actually gotten its proboscis stuck. And that was just a really interesting, I thought it was dead. I touched it, it moved. I was like, I got really excited. So I took the flower off, carefully dissected it, held on to the moth because it's a nighttime flying moth. So it had been there probably most of the night, stuck hanging from its tongue, which is not very pleasant. I set it on the leaf, let it recover, and it was gone. But that was just a really cool experience because that I also have Virginia creeper in my yard, which a lot of people get rid of because it's kind of aggressive, it takes over. But if I didn't have that in my yard, I probably wouldn't have that sphinx moth and I wouldn't have that interaction. So even the more aggressive natives do play a role. And of course, we love milkweed. It smells amazing. A lot of interactions that we have with them can also benefit ourselves. So there's a couple websites that you can use. The Xerces Society has stuff. The National Wildlife Federation has a lot of good research on host plants and keystone species. So we are part of the Eastern Temperate Forest ecoregion, and they have lists on what you can plant. So that's a really good resource to go to get kind of those heavy hitters, things that are going to have those nice interactions and provide a lot of caterpillars. So then keystone species are very similar to host plants, but keystones are heavy hitters. So if you're going to plant just one native plant, these are the plants to plant. So keystone is referring to the top of an arch. In architecture, you don't have an arch without a keystone. The bricks are going to fall and it's going to collapse on itself. So the keystone species of an ecosystem provide really high benefits to a wide variety of other life. So instead of just having monarchs, because we have milkweed, they're going to have a lot of other species that can utilize them. So a couple non-insect and non-plant examples are like the wolves of Yellowstone. They had a lot of issues with a lot of herbivory because they took away all the predators. So the deer population, the elk population, those all exploded. We reintroduced the wolves, everything started to come back into a balance. Even beavers, these are ecosystem builders. They make a dam, they change the landscape, and it benefits a really diverse array of life. So we have plant species that can do that too. So again, I'm going to refer to Doug Talamy a lot because he's I think the grandfather of all of this. Oaks are kind of your biggest heavy hitter. So for Lepidoptera, which again are moths and butterfly caterpillars, oaks generally throughout the US can provide over 500 species a life source of food. In Wisconsin, it's a little bit smaller because we don't have that many species here, but still 400 species could potentially come into your yard because you planted one oak tree. That's a lot of bird food, a lot of free bird food, except for the cost of the tree. Prunus, cherry species are also big, so are willows, and then birches and poplars. So again, some of these are kind of those weedier species that maybe some people don't want to have in their landscape, but if you have just one, you can provide a lot of life. And this was an example. There's a wavy line prominent caterpillar. So as one normally does when they go camping, you set up a mothing light and you have a black light to look for caterpillars. I mean, come on, everybody does that, right? So a friend of mine and I did that last August at Bong, actually, so not far from here. And we were looking for caterpillars. So that was a fun find to see. So these are kind of my top, these are the top 3 tree species. Trees and shrubs are kind of your biggest heavy hitters. They're going to provide the most food source. So getting some trees, some canopy trees, some understory trees, some shrubs, all of that vertical diversity in our landscape is really going to bring in a lot of insect life. So this is an example. This is a viceroy. So it looks similar to a monarch, but doesn't, it has a line on the hind wings. Look at how cool that caterpillar is. Those are on willows. So willows are really great species. I have a couple examples, top picks that I would put into your yard to bring in a lot of wildlife that are kind of more well-behaved natives. Chokecherry, I just put a little asterisk by that. That gets a fungal disease that a lot of people are not a fan of cosmetically. It can eventually kill the plant, but usually it's not a big problem. And also the cherry species, in my experience, excuse me, they kind of move in on their own. The birds are bringing those seeds in. So you usually don't have to buy them. I have a couple in my yard that they just come in from the birds coming into my yard from other plants. So you can buy them, but maybe buy just a few because they're going to spread throughout the landscape. And then looking at shrubs, so looking down at the next level of your landscape. Hazelnuts are really high. So again, we're still getting around 100, but then you can see it quickly drops off once we get into 9-barks and a couple other species. So the trees are really those heavy hitters for providing a lot of life support on the caterpillar level. Again, my favorite kind of picks on the bottom, these are ones that I'm usually putting 2 or 3 of those species in every design that we're doing. Hazelnuts are great. Red osier dogwoods, you get that winter interest of the red stems. Pagoda dogwood, if you have a shady area, these are beautiful. The biggest one I've ever seen is the one at Joanne's at the farm. Like that thing is just massive.
Started out at.
Yeah.
By the way, I just want to remind everybody, all of these are available for sale.
Yes.
Plant sale
Yeah.
website.
I have a question. I just would love to have a pagoda dogwood in my yard. But I've read that there's like some disease or fungus or
So
something.
if you don't site it in the right spot, they do not like to be in sun. And they do not like hot sun or dry conditions. So it's an understory woodland plant. I've had arguments and discussions with horticulture trade people about this, saying that native plants aren't good for the landscape. And they showed a picture of pagoda dogwood in full sun in the middle of a turf field. Well, of course, it's not going to survive there. It's going to get the golden canker. So, the best thing to do with pagoda dogwoods, in my experience, is if you don't have like full shade or most shade with other canopy trees, putting it on the east side of your house or the north side. They don't like the south sun. They don't like the west side. The west side, they're going to bake unless you have another canopy tree that's, providing shade or the neighbor's house or something, but keeping the soil moist and keeping it from getting stressed. But if you have some in your landscape that you've had the canker on, I would not try to put any more in because it's just going to quickly spread to that. I don't know how long you'd have to wait for that fungus to like get out of the system if you cut down a pagoda dogwood that had it. I was at a site in Hartford and I was really disappointed because I wanted to put pagoda dogwoods in, but they had some in their wooded lot and they had the canker on them. So yes, our native plants are not free of diseases. They do still get stuff. The biggest thing is like preventing it from getting stressed, and that goes into the right place, the right plant. So siting them is very important. So yeah, don't put a pagoda dogwood as a specimen plant on the southern side of your house. It's not going to be happy. Put it in a woodland garden, something where it's getting at least a half day of shade, and especially shade from the afternoon sun. This was another fun find. So golden, and when we're going down to the Forbs, so these are your herbaceous plants. So grasses, flowering plants, your coneflowers, things like that. The numbers kind of drop off, but those goldenrods, asters really aren't that high, but wild strawberry is still pretty high. That's a really great plant and pretty easy to fit into your landscape, but goldenrods are really huge. They still provide for over 100 different species of caterpillars. This is a geometer moth caterpillar that I thought, again, walking around my yard, I was like, why is there a stick in my goldenrod? Got closer, realized it was not a stick, just a really good camouflage caterpillar. And I don't think if I had not watched Doug Tallamy's talks, I don't think I would have put those 2 and 2 together, probably still would have thought it was a stick. But just a really cool caterpillar, really cool find. Just hanging out, pretending it's not what it actually is, so it doesn't get eaten. So with goldenrods in designs, I usually put those in as woodland plants. So if you have a shady area, if you have a north side of a house, you have a shady area for a woodland garden. The goldenrods that are woodland plants are less aggressive and they don't spread as much and they stay shorter in stature. So if you're looking at more kind of neighbor respectful people who don't fully understand or appreciate the nature of native plants and you want to keep things a little more tame, putting in the woodland garden asters and goldenrods is where I sneak those into a lot of our designs because they're very easily spreading plants. They can take over a little bit. Is that bad? No. But for a designed or more visually appealing landscape, maybe for some people, I live in a turf area where none of my neighbors do this. So I kind of tone things down a little bit, not too much, but and again, wild strawberry is another really great one. That's a nice low growing ground cover, can tolerate any condition, and you can provide a lot for our Lepidoptera with those.
But I do have a question.
Yeah.
So I have beautiful oak glade. These are about 7 years old, and I'm doing the oaks of in restoration. Let me tell you could tell me the golden won't spread aggressively. That's pretty much all. All you can see, obviously, there's a lot of other things going on underneath. Thinking about succession, is there some point where there are other things that are going to take over? Because I mean, I just expect anything I plant native to have its own mind.
Yes, yes, that is the thing about native plants is they do move around to find where they're most suited. The goldenrods that you have that are spreading aggressively, are those like Canada goldenrod, or are they like the zigzag and the...
Probably Canada.
Okay, so yeah, the Canada goldenrod is an early successional plant. It moves in, it takes over. Mowing it at certain times can diminish that. You can set back a couple other things, but if you take like a string trimmer and selectively mow, that can set it back. But yes, you know, we can speed up the process of succession, so that we can get more diversity in there. If you just let it go, is it wrong? No, it's going to change. It's always going to be changing. That's the nice thing about landscapes is there's never an end point. You know, things will move in and so you can get more diversity. I would suggest mowing it.
Yeah, it's the time to start mowing path through my little.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can't go wrong really with really yellow flowers and
Yes.
and the
Yes.
peas. God, yeah.
Yes, it's hard to take those plants out of there. But yeah, in restoration, you know, Canada goldenrod is one of those species that in a lot of our projects, we're managing it almost as a weed because it does take over.
Okay.
So yeah, we're being selective. We're trying to take care of it where we can, and you know, in other areas let it go. But that's why we, you know, when we're doing buckthorn removal and things like that, and especially like in oak systems, when you open up the canopy, you let all this new light in, those early successional plants are going to come in and take over. So having a plan for that.
Cool.
Yeah. Oops. So then kind of switching gears from Lepidoptera and caterpillars, looking at bees. There's a lot of bees. There's 30% of our 1,800 species that are native to Eastern United States that are pollen specialists. So this means they only go after pollen of a specific plant or a specific plant family. So if we want our bees, you know, people think about honeybees, those are non-native, those are farmed and cultivated species. We have a lot of bumblebee species, and we have even more of the solitary bees. So these are very small bees. Usually they are not building a colony like a bumblebee. They don't have a queen and workers and males. They have the male and the female. The female emerges in the spring, mates, and then starts doing her own nest by herself. Then her life ends and her offspring hopefully can continue. So these species really need a lot of help. They're becoming more and more aware in the landscape or bringing light to them. But these are the ones that we really should be planting for because they have very specific relationships. So there are keystone pollen species. Sunflowers are really big in this. Again, those are tough plants to fit into, especially a smaller urban space or a smaller landscape because they can be pretty aggressive and pretty big. So those are always a little bit tougher to get in, but again, goldenrods and asters are really huge. So if you can fit in a couple goldenrod species or plants and some asters, you're gonna provide for a lot of different bees. Black-eyed Susans are also pretty high up down there, and Coreopsis. So those are all research. Again, this is all from the National Wildlife Federation's website. So if you want more information and more details, you can go on there. But when we plant for specialist species, so this is a little, I believe this is like a mining bee that, you know, we think of bergamot going for nectar, but this is a pollen specialist on bergamot. So they are taking the little pollen anthers on the tip of the flower. That's what they're using to provision their nests. So when we plant for the specialists, we are also providing for generalist species like our butterflies and our bumblebees that will typically go to most native plants that we have in our landscape and even ornamentals. And again, this is an example of planting for, you know, specialist species. The Baltimore checker spot is an amazing butterfly, typically found in wetland areas because its host plant is the turtlehead. So this is one where I finally found a caterpillar at the Cedarburg Bog State Natural Area in Cedarburg, or Saukville actually. was really excited to find it. I've planted this at multiple properties, never seen a caterpillar on it, but you get cute little bumblebee butts coming out of them in the fall. And these are queens typically. So these are queens that have to build up their energy reserves to make it through the winter. So we may never see the Baltimore checker spot caterpillar on these plants, but they are still providing, and they're there. So if they do fly by, they could use them, but we're providing for other insects and other life too. And plants are not just for caterpillars and bees. So a lot of our native beetles will also consume pollen. So we have some of the soldier beetles here, again on a Rudbeckia, black-eyed Susan. So that's a pollen specialist, but we're also providing for our beetles. I found quick beetles in my yard for the first time this past year, which was a really cool thing. And I found one eating on the geranium pollen. There's also, like I mentioned, sawfly larvae. There are native sawflies, not just the invasive columbine one. But I have ash trees. My neighbor's ash tree died, and I have ash saplings that come up in my yard. I let them grow because I have life that is using them. So even though the plant may never reach full maturity with the emerald ash borer concerns, maybe I'll be lucky and have one that's resistant to it. But in the meantime, I'm going to let them grow as understory canopy trees in my backyard. And I had a bunch of sawflies. This was just one of them. And again, they look like little wasps when they're in maturity, once it goes from pupa into adult. So want to talk about birds for a little bit. Again, I think this is where a lot of people get into gardening, is because they want to have birds and they put up bird feeders. I'm going to show you how you can eliminate that step and just enjoy the landscape. So there are studies, this is kind of a heavy hitter, that we've lost a lot of birds. There's a lot of different reasons for this, of course. It's not just one cause, but a new report that came out last year said that 1 in 4 birds has been lost. So that's a huge decline. And in some species, especially the ones that are using caterpillars, they're insectivores. That's the reason, is we've lost our insect population. So we need to make habitat. And what is habitat? It's not just about the food. It's also about shelter. So places for them to nest, to shield themselves during storm events. And we also need some water resources. So I'm going to talk mostly about that food portion. Again, referring to Doug Tallamy and his students and the research they've done, a pair of chickadees needs 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise a clutch of babies. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to raise our kids. That's a lot of work for a tiny little bird to find. And when they only have bird feeders with seed, that's sunflower or millet or anything like that, they're not feeding their babies that. They're feeding their babies these juicy little protein-packed wiggle worms. And so they need to have host plants that are providing those caterpillars. And this is a reason we don't have a lot of damage from our native insects, because the plant doesn't want to be eaten. The birds are coming and they're eating those. So there's a lot of interactions going on that we don't always see and don't always witness, but they're out there. And then also thinking about hummingbirds. This is something that people always want, and they put their little sugar water contraptions out for them. But that's only part of their life food. You know, we don't only just drink soda, you know, we need to have our protein and vegetables and all this other stuff. So hummingbirds, 80% of their diet is insects and spiders. They're not getting that from your red water that you're putting into your feeder. So they need to have nectar sources. They need to have host plants in your yard so that they can feed their babies. And one thing I just wanted to point out, like New Jersey tea, which is that white flower shrub in the bigger picture, that was always listed as a plant for hummingbirds, and I just never fully understood that. And it's because of all the insects it attracts. The ants and everything that uses those white flowers, it's the hummingbirds eating that stuff off of them. It's not necessarily that the hummingbird is taking the nectar source from there.
The rabbits don't grow.
Yeah, yes, yes. Rabbits and deer are a whole nother wildlife problem.
And the hawks will come.
Yeah.
There's, you're feeding another bird.
But I will say, if you plant densely, planting especially New Jersey tea, I've had people with a lot more success planting small little plugs of it in amongst other plants, because then you don't have this big plate full of spaghetti or something for them to come and just demolish. Mine I planted from little plugs, and I have them planted with a bunch of sedges and other stuff around that the rabbits, I have a pretty hefty rabbit population. They have not bothered it. So planting it in, like, get your other plantings going and then plopping it in as plugs is probably going to give you more success than planting those really nice big bushes that you can get. So now I'm going to talk about how do we make selections for our home landscapes and show a couple examples of how we can put native plants into our yard and what species we can put in there. So we're going to talk about that. This was a project where it was all turf grass before. The client didn't want to mow. It was a sloped area that was a ditch. They just weren't using it. So we planted in a bunch of natives and made a really beautiful garden bed that's supporting a lot of life. So green mulch is a newer term. It's a way to reduce the amount of work and inputs that we as humans have to put into our landscape. So putting in a native ground cover. This is where I said the wild strawberry can be really easily incorporated into any landscape, whether you have ornamentals or not. This is kind of that gateway plant to kind of fill in, cover the ground. It provides pollen and nectar sources with the flowers. It provides fruit with the little tiny strawberries. And it's also a huge host plant. One year when I was looking for my hepatica in my yard to see if it was coming up, I was getting anxious, looking for those first signs of spring. I stumbled upon this little caterpillar that was overwintering. So this is what, when the wood thrushes come through and the migratory birds come through and they're scratching through your leaf litter that you left over the winter, because we all know we do that. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for these little morsels, these little juicy protein packs, and that's what is getting them the energy to either keep moving or to say, this looks like a good spot that I could nest and raise a family. So really easy plant. Sedges and grasses are also really great to use as green mulch in amongst other plants. Native trees, I've already talked about this, planting the whole story of what a woodland should be. This was our backyard, or is our backyard. We had a bunch of mature silver maples, but that was it. When we moved in, it was 5 maples and grass, barely grass. So we started putting in some understory trees. We put in some ironwoods. We put in hazelnuts. We put in a basswood. So we're planting for the next generation. And so whenever these other trees come out or are left as snags in the landscape, we have a new plant that's going to fill that canopy and help shade out that space. So planting in layers of the landscape, having your tall canopy trees, having your oaks, you may not get to enjoy the shade of the oak tree that you plant, but somebody is going to be using it and someone will get to see that shade. So that was a little oak tree. I planted a bunch. I had a client who didn't want them. They were self-seeding and being planted by the wildlife, and she didn't want them. So I started pulling them out and planting them in my yard. The bunnies ate that, I think 3 years in a row. I kept caging it and I would take the cage off because I'm a silly gardener thinking that the bunnies were done eating it. And every year they would always nibble it down. But now it is about 3 feet tall. And it started out from a tiny little seedling. So they really grow fast. You planting them small is usually the best way because they go through a lot less transplant shock and they actually outgrow a big bald and burlap plant. So getting those free little whips for $1. Again, you may not get to sit underneath it, but your children, your grandchildren, and then in that lifetime, it's going to provide a lot of habitat value and a lot of caterpillars. And then drop zone planting. So you have this oak tree, but you're going to mow underneath it? No. We want to be able to let those caterpillars that survive the birds drop to the ground, go into the soil, pupate, complete their life cycle, come out as adults, and continue the story. So we want to have plantings underneath our oak trees. This is one of the places whenever I go to a site visit or a consult, this is the one thing I'm looking for is like, do you have a tree? Whether it's native or not, native is better. But even if it's a non-native tree, like let's plant something underneath it because somebody's going to use that space. You don't want to mow underneath those branches. It's a place to leave the leaves, leave that leaf litter. If you're listening to podcasts, In Defense of Plants had an amazing podcast on leaving the leaves and all of the parasitic parasitoid wasps that came out of that leaf litter. That's what's controlling our pests, is those little tiny wasps that nobody turns an eye to because we think they're a gnat or something. Those are keeping all of our ecosystem problems in check, and they're in the leaf litter and they need that material to survive.
What's the name of that podcast?
In Defense of Plants. It's a really great podcast. And then also hedges. This is where we can pack a lot of diversity instead of planting a row of arborvitae that we have to protect every year because the deer eat it. Let's mix it up. Let's put in a bunch of different shrubs. Let's put in those thicket forming shrubs that may not be small enough for in front of the house, our elderberries, our hazelnuts, things like that. Let's just put in a bunch of diversity into our hedges instead of putting up a fence. Or if your neighbor puts up a fence and you don't want to look at it, put these plants in front of it. You can also put in a lot of perennials. So this one, again, is my backyard. We had the arborvitae were already there, but there was a big gap between them. So I planted in some 9-barks, some Joe Pye weeds, some big blue stem, some chokeberries, things like that, and just planting in a diverse species. And this is where you can also get some of those trees. If you have power lines, make sure you're looking at that. Don't plant an oak tree underneath the power line. But you can plant in a musclewood, an ironwood, serviceberry. All of those things are going to stay under those power lines or not at least interfere as much with them. But you can get a lot. And this also helps if you do it and your neighbor does it and their neighbor does it, then you start to create these corridors that wildlife can move through undetected by us safely. And another book, oh my goodness, Noah's Garden? By Sarah Stein is another really great one that it's an old book, but it's a really great one, and she has a beautiful illustration in there on how if you do it and your neighbor does it, how we can create these corridors for insects and for wildlife to move through.
Question.
Yeah.
So in an installation like this, what do you do to control those plants from not invading your neighbor's landscape?
I never plant on the property line. I usually do a couple foot buffer from the property line, and then wherever they're going to grow, spacing it out so that they're not going to grow. But I got really excited. One of our houses across the street went for sale, and a bunch of asters started growing in their lawn because they weren't mowing it every day. And I was like, the plants are spreading. If they're not gonna, be as diligent about taking care of their lawn and letting your plants move into their landscape, it's kind of up to them. But yes, we usually give a good buffer, and sometimes, we'll have a little mowing strip if people are really then they don't have a good relationship with the neighbor, so that they can maintain that edge on their side. But it still provides a safe space for them to move. This is a corridor that the possum in our neighborhood always goes up and down. We've had fox living in our neighborhood 2 years ago now. And you could see the tracks going through this area because there is a hole in the neighbor's fence in the back. So this has become a really main corridor for wildlife in our area. And I live in Glendale, so it's not Milwaukee, but it's also not very rural. So this is the Native Plant Finder, the National Wildlife Federation's website. This is still in the works. It's still being built because we're still learning things. But you can search here and find your top species for your specific zip code. So I typed in the zip code for down here, and these are the top trees. So if you can plant, or trees and shrubs, if you can plant something in one of these genera, you're going to get at least almost 300 potential insects nesting in your yard. And that's just by planting one plant. So think if you plant a couple oaks and, you just keep building off of that and you get more and more diversity. And same with the herbaceous layer. So this is doing a lot of the grunt work for you because you might be like, this is way too overwhelming. There's a lot of information here. The number one takeaway, which you guys are probably already familiar with and know, is just plant diversity. Plant different species, different types of plants, the trees, shrubs, your ground layer, plant the different layers, get a lot of diversity in that space. And only 70% of our landscape needs to contain native plants to provide for the birds and the higher trophic levels. This is again work done by Doug Talamy and Desiree Narango, talking about how to survive, make those chickadee clutches survive. And they looked at landscapes, and if they had 70% native plants, they were able to raise a full clutch of chickadees. So we don't need to get rid of our peonies, our lilacs, some of those, ornamental, sentimental plants in our landscape. If they're invasive or potentially invasive, like barberry, those are ones that we should take out for sure. But we don't have to get rid of all of our ornamentals. We just need to get native plants into the landscape. So I really want people to be aware of that. But if you can go 100% native, that's even better. But in addition to the plants, talking about habitat, we also need to provide shelter. This is a huge thing with birds for nesting sites, but it's also for other insects too. If we're tidying up our lawns, if we're mowing and blowing and getting rid of all the leaf litter and all the dead material, we're basically saying, come live here, but we're going to kick you out before you can complete your life cycle. And that's not good. So these are just some examples again from my yard. Well, I guess that top one's not from my yard, but I've had, those are cellophane bees. So if you don't mulch your yard every year with hardwood mulch and you leave some bare ground open, you get the ground nesting bees. Again, these are solitary bees. These are very specific. They're not yellow jackets. Those aren't even bees. So when someone says they got stung by a ground bee, ask them, make sure it wasn't a yellow jacket, because more often than not, it probably was. Ground bees, I have gotten stung by them, but that's because they went in my shirt and I squished them. So that's fair. That's fair. I said I'm sorry and went on my way. Left that space alone. But it's just so awesome to find these little guys just hovering right over the ground in early spring. They're looking for those, and you'll see a bunch of them, but each female is raising her own babies. There's not a colony per se. They're not helping each other. The bottom middle picture is a black swallowtail caterpillar chrysalis. It looks like a little fox to me, but those are in our landscape. So you'll see those a lot. What golden Alexander is their native host plant, but if you have dill or anything in that umbel family, they'll consume that. But if we're not leaving twigs and stuff for them to connect to and pupate, we're not doing them justice. And leaving our stems. This is the mining bee. They're only out for a couple weeks in the spring, and then they'll have another generation later in the year. But if you leave your stems, when you cut things back and tiny things up in the spring, leave them about a foot or so tall, because those guys are coming and they're going to lay all their eggs and seal them off in there. So we want to give them that habitat too. And they usually prefer vertical stems because, if it lays on the ground, it's going to get wet, it's going to get moldy, it's going to decompose a little faster than if they're upright. But leaving some logs in the landscape too. These are green metallic sweat bees. There's a couple of them. They have excavated holes in that top picture. So those are all, this was in the fall. It was a hiking. I was looking for salamanders, but I found that. Overturned a log and found all of these cavity for all of the overwintering females. So leaving logs and leaving dead material is really important. And insects are the little things that run the world. They really are. They need native plants. The native plants are what harvests the energy of the sun, makes food, and then the insects are able to take that energy from the plants and put it into the higher trophic levels and spread it throughout the food web. So without insects, we really are going to be at a standstill. And we're kind of going through that period of a lot of insecticide use, and a lot of information and studies are coming out that we're really lacking the insect populations. And I wanted to show this lady beetle larvae because sometimes we freak out when we see a pest in the landscape, and we need to let the ecosystem heal. It's been through a lot, had some trauma. Yes, you might see these oleander aphids move in on your milkweeds or other plants, and you freak out. You want to wash them, you want to put soap on them, you want to do all this stuff because these plants are for the native insects and not for these invasives. But if you just kind of step back for a season or two, the predatory insects are going to move in. The lady beetles, the lacewings, the top picture is a lacewing larvae. You can actually feel them bite. I've let them crawl on me and you can actually feel it. They are little dinosaurs of the insect world. Like they just zoom around, they eat anything in sight. Will they eat caterpillars? Yes. So they're non-discriminatory, but if we provide enough habitat, we can provide those other areas and they're going to go after pests too. So this is just an example of the oleander aphids on a common or on a world milkweed, and then you got the lady beetles coming in. So take a step back, take a deep breath. Usually within a season or two, you have enough predatory insects that come into the landscape. Yeah.
What do you have to say about Japanese people?
Oh,
That's all I have to say.
lick them. Those I will put into soapy water and clean them up. The best thing that you can do to prevent Japanese beetles is, not irrigating your lawn, because as grubs, they're usually attracted to well, moist, irrigated, maintained lawns. So remove your lawn is kind of one of the easy things to do. Put in a bunch of native plants. Stop irrigating it. They're gonna be here. I mean, it's just the problem. I honestly don't have too many of them. And again, I'm in a pretty urban area. Don't put up the little pheromone attractants, because you're just saying, hey, come over here, and you're gonna have more of them.
Success with not eradicating them, but drugging them.
Elaborate.
Well, I found I had planted geraniums and in pots, and I found that the lady beetles would eat they would have just a couple of bites, it looked like, of the flower, and then they would pass out. So there's like some kind of a drug or something in the geranium that like it drugs them. And then they pass out, and then they wake up and they start eating again. And so what you can do is just take them and, toss them into your soapy water, because they're unconscious.
Yeah.
You're not going your line.
They're actually entrapped to the geranium.
How many geraniums do you have to eat to enjoy them?
I just smoke them. I just smoke them dry.
Yeah, I mean, usually I think like the rosaceae, your like raspberries, service berries, your apples, that's a really highly valuable or attracting, your roses for Japanese beetles. So having less of those, I know like my service berry always gets, and that's the plant I go over to with my soapy water, and I just knock them all in. I go through my raspberry bushes and do that too. It's just, those are one that you're probably going to have to interfere with, unfortunately. But the aphids, I would not bother with those. Give them a couple seasons and they should start to wind down. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, I'll leave you with a beautiful polyphemus moth that I found. Yeah, and I'm here for questions. Yeah.
So you talked about drop zone planting?
Yeah.
What do you do about black walnut trees? How would you plant around that?
So black walnut trees and drop zones. The belief of black walnut trees, and there's some research coming out that juglans might not be as toxic as we think. Native plants grow underneath black walnuts. So I have a black walnut growing that a squirrel planted in my yard, and I've left that, and my native plants are still growing underneath it. It's not very tall. So maybe what
are you growing?
So the plants that are around there, it's pretty sunny still because it's not a mature tree. I have world milkweed, I have St. John's wort, I have hoary vervain, big blue stem, little blue stem. So the plants that are more susceptible to black walnut are also sun-loving plants. So if you plant those like a tomato underneath a black walnut, you're probably never going to get a tomato anyways because it's not enough sun. So planting our woodland garden, you will have probably less diversity underneath a black walnut tree by planting woodland plants, but most of the plants, if you look at the ones that are susceptible to juglans, they're not native. And that's kind of the reason, is because they haven't evolved to be around those plants. So yeah, you should still be able to get a good diversity of things growing underneath there. I think any like sedges, I don't think are affected by it. And I'm sure you could probably, I don't know about geraniums for sure, but the woodland, the native geraniums, not the annuals, but golden Alexander, I think I've seen that underneath walnuts. I mean, there's a park. I mean, yeah, I mean, you see other trees growing with black walnuts. So, yeah, I would say woodland garden plants, shade tolerant plants is going to be a better, don't worry so much about the jugglers. Look at the sunlight.
Or maybe.
That's a good question. I don't know. Go to the native plant finder and look it up. I don't know how many they do. But they are like, squirrels will use them. They are very valuable in the landscape. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you repeat people's questions for the people who
Yes.
are on Zoom, please?
Yes.
And thank you very much.
I think that the walnut cause the soil to be more acidic, so if we find plants that are tolerant to that as well.
Did you guys hear the walnut question, or do you want me to repeat that?
I heard part of it, not all of it.
Okay, she was just asking what to plant under a black walnut for a drop zone. And I just
Thank
said
you.
planting more shade tolerant species, and then someone suggested more acidic loving species too. And that's the same with planting under like pine trees and spruce trees. It's usually the moisture content and not so much the acidity, because the needle, like that's just on the top layer of the soil. Once you get down into the soil, it's not as acidic, but it's usually the drought. So planting like Pennsylvania sedge, wild strawberry, things like that underneath spruce trees. My spruce trees are limbed up, but I had, when we moved into our house, there was 3 spruce trees, 3 blue spruce or Colorado blue spruce on each corner of the property. They're limbed up pretty high. I've got prairie dock, I've got bergamot, I've got side oats grandma, I've got bottle brush grass. Like I just have a whole diversity of things growing underneath spruce trees. So it's not necessarily the needles. They get more sunlight, but it's the shade and the dry shade. That's always a struggle with spruce trees and pine trees.
So, right across my fence, my neighbors have a black walnut tree. I've lived in the house for 35 years. Years ago, I could plant a lot of things there, and then slowly some things were not thriving. So, I've changed, and I've noticed that, Prairie Nursery, not Prairie Moon, but Prairie Nursery lists black walnut tolerant plants. So I have a bunch of new orders in, plus I got some from Wild Ones last year. So,
Yeah.
Adding just facing the facts that tree's gonna be there, so.
Yeah. So someone else just suggested Prairie Nursery has a black walnut tolerant species list. And I believe they also have a evergreen, like a spruce and pine tree list of species that are tolerant of those conditions too. And again, dry shade is your best bet looking at those. And both Prairie Nursery and Prairie Moon, they have great filtering things. I would take their deer resistant with an asterisk, because those little buggers don't really care, and they don't read the internet, so they don't know. Any woody plants that you're planting, cage them for the first season at least. If you're planting a little oak, I would cage it, especially from August through March, because of deer rub and also browse. So those plants, we've co-evolved with deer. We have too many deer in the landscape, so it's inevitable that they're going to come and do some nibbling until they get to be 6 feet or taller. So we cage everything that we plant because it's an investment. These plants are not cheap. So it is, you're planting for the future. You want to protect those things. And most of the caging material, it starts to blend into the landscape anyway. So I definitely highly recommend it for at least the first season. And then after that, you can carefully take them off. I mean, one property, we caged everything and we're like, okay, the plants are growing outside of the caging. We could probably start taking it off. We started taking them off this last season, and now all of the rabbits have been girdling everything as the winter progressed. So we've been putting it back up. So lessons learned. Girdling's not as bad, especially if you catch it early, but doing a little fencing for the rabbits is needed too.
Two things. You had talked about the camouflage bluebird.
Yeah.
Which decorates itself with
Yeah.
bits of petal, and then as an adult is the wavy like emerald.
Mhm.
So probably about half a dozen years ago, I found a dead small green butterfly. And it was a wavy line emerald, but because it is so small, I'm not kidding, it's only about half an inch by half an inch, it's really tiny. And so, but looking at it under a hand lens, I could see the wavy lines and then was able to identify it. So some of these things are so small that to really see them and to get to see its characteristics, that's necessary. So that was a cool thing. And when I find insects that have given up the ghost in my yard, I collect them. And they're identified and labeled, and it's just wonderful to have them because they're things that have come there but you wouldn't appreciate them unless you looked at them for that detail.
Yeah.
The other question I had was about the cellophane bee, which was in, and it's possible that was everything that it excavated from the ground.
Yeah.
But for the past, probably about 4 or 5 years, I've been noticing in the fall especially, mounds of ropey stuff in the lawn and at edges, which I assume were the earthworms coming up, and that they were earthworm castings. And over the years, I have seen an increase in this because there aren't inputs into the lawn, definitely not the flower beds that will discourage life. So, but that cellophane bee looked like it was in the earthworm castings in that picture,
Yeah.
which would be very diggable.
Yeah. So for online folks, the first comment was just that a lot of these things are small and tiny. So to really appreciate them, we need to slow down, look at them, get a hand lens, get a magnifying glass, things like that to really see them. I use a lot of pictures. But yeah, when we do insect surveys on a lot of our projects, we're taking a hand lens or we're taking a little jar that we're catching things with a net to properly identify them. The second one was talking about the cellophane bee, which is a ground nesting bee, and they're not the only one. But I think like out of all the solitary bees, it's like 70% of them are stem nesting and 30% are ground nesting. I could be off on that, but she's noticing that there's things that she thought was worm castings in the lawn and in the flower beds, but wondering if maybe it's the excavation from the bee. Is that correct?
Well, and yet they occur in the fall when I don't think there's too much excavating.
Yeah, most of them
So
are more in the
that's
spring.
why I'm assuming it's worm castings.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say with the cellophane bees, when they're active, for sure, like you will see a pretty decent sized hole. So I would say like a half inch or so, and you'll see them flying around because they just kind of hover right over the ground, moving around. So I would look at it this spring and see if you ever see any holes. If you don't see any like decent sized holes, then I would say they're probably worms. I have not had any experience with jumping worms.
They're not jumping.
Okay,
worms.
good.
I don't have enough.
Okay.
They leave the ground like coffee grounds.
Yes, the jumping worms.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I would say yes, it's probably more earthworms, which are still not native, but it's probably most likely them that are doing that because you will see the holes. Some of the solitary bees will cover up, and they usually do when they're done nesting and the adult has perished. They will cover up and seal off their the colony or the excavation where the nest. So I would watch in the spring. And maybe you're just seeing them more in the fall because all the plant life is starting to die back in the flower beds.
I
But
see them a lot around edges.
yes,
And
they do like the
worms
edges. Yep.
Have long ago put in edges.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to be along the edges of
Okay.
beds.
But
And
I see them also in spots in the yard, all over the yard. And
Yeah.
Probably this fall more than ever, so.
yeah, I personally have not seen them too much in like grass. Because you have all the root and the chaff and the thatch and everything. They usually like to have bare open ground. So like a lot of sandy pathways, you'll see them. You'll see the little, and they do look like worm castings, like when you see a bunch of them. And that's usually after they're sealed up. So it could be. I would look at them in the spring and keep an eye out.
Thank
Mhm.
you. Watching.
Well, I really learned the lesson of bare soil for native bees. Because I had a berm of dirt from where we had built a path. And I've got things like strawberries sort of going there and St. John's wort, but I'm like, it's kind of eroding. So I'm gonna throw some mulch on that there. The bees came out and they were like, please stop, please stop. And I said, I'm very sorry.
Yeah.
So now I have the big ugly berm that the bees adore.
Yeah.
It's really exciting to see them come out in the spring. It's
And,
like,
and they're so gentle.
yes, yes. And they just kind of, we say hover like, 8 inches or 10 inches
Yeah.
above the ground.
Yeah.
Someday I'll get a rusty patch. Someday.
Yes. Yeah, and there's if Rusty Patch are kind of you want to provide for them, Judy Carden is out of Madison. She has a lot of resources on what she's seen them use. Culver's root is really great for them. St. John's wort. Joe Pyeweed is where I've seen Rusty Patch on in my yard, but purple coneflower too. I also, when I first started looking for them and seeing them, bergamot, because they are short-tongued bees, so they will nectar rob. So instead of sticking their mouth through the tube of the flower, they'll actually come at the top, chew a hole, and suck out so that they're not actually pollinating, so they're kind of little thieves.
Go for it.
But if you ever see a bee that's just like on the top of a bergamot instead of on the side, it's probably a Rusty Patch doing
I've
it.
got
But
all of those, but I am of course
Yeah.
surrounded by the desert of lawns.
Yeah.
But Jessica Orlovsky says there's a nest a little less than 5 miles from me. And she says, if I'm patient, they will eventually find.
So I would watch in the fall too, because the males will go like twice as far as the females, because they're looking for a lady, so they're gonna expand their space. So you're probably more likely to see, but if you're that close to a nest, she said she's about 5 miles from a known Rusty Patch nest, which changes every year, but the males are probably what you're more likely to see. That's all I've ever seen in my yard, but I usually see them every year. So I know that they're close by. They just haven't fully gotten into my yard yet. But yeah, I've had yellow bumblebees. I didn't put it in this slide, which I don't know why I did, but I have been documenting all the insects and species that I've seen in my yard. And then if I took a summer just to do that, I'm sure I would have a lot more. This year I'm hoping to do some mothing and doing some lighting. Yeah, I have a lot of light pollution in my neighborhood, so we don't have lights on in our yard, so I'm hoping to see a lot more life that way. But yeah, the Rusty Patch, the males will fly further in the fall, so I would keep an eye out in the fall, and they have the patch, so they're pretty easy. The queens do not have a patch, so they look a little different in the fall. So it's a whole another realm of life that you can go down.
Couple things. Your presentation kind of focuses on host plants
Mhm.
to get caterpillars.
Yes.
What kind of a volume would you say, like, the inference I got from you is that, you put one of these here and it gets these caterpillars. If you've ever been to, Old World, Wisconsin, they have got prickly ash in a volume that they have got giant swallowtails everywhere, so a species that survive. What kind of volume? Let's say I've got a 1 acre wooded area. I'm working on various things. I've got oak trees, hazelnut, this, that, and everything else. I've also got areas that I'm kind of clearing out, try and put medium density in. What kind of volume do I need to sustain the insects? Because if I plant, for, let's say, 4 prickly ash, with the openness of the neighborhood, those birds are going to decimate all those caterpillars in a month. And it'll be, quote, yeah, food for the birds, but
Yeah.
it's a non-sustainable habitat. Or is that just, how do you overwhelm the birds?
Yeah.
So that like for me personally, growing up, I was into collecting insects.
Yeah.
And I'd walk to school and every 4th or 5th tree would have your Prometheus, Polyphemus, cones in the trees. I used to collect them, stick them in the spring storm, and in the spring they'd hatch.
Yeah.
And then I'd put them all, the females, in a screen cage and 4 in the morning, there'd be a dozen males.
Yeah.
So I mean, they would kind of self-propagate themselves. I've been, in fact, walking out here in the library, the only place you ever find them are where there's building lights near trees to attract the moths to lay the eggs. What kind of volume do you need to actually form a sustainable insect? So that year after year, you're producing enough caterpillars to survive to adulthood, yet the
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, how many plants do you need to plant to create a sustainable population where they're always going to be in the landscape, essentially? Because if our landscapes are so fragmented that if you plant just one plant, is it gonna really, it's gonna attract them, but is it gonna actually keep them in the neighborhood? I don't know. I'm not an entomologist, so I don't study that aspect of it. But I will say, like, I have 1/3 of an acre and I have pretty regularly the same amount of wildlife insects every single year. I don't know, but you know, it takes, if you're having birds that are consuming them, yes, they're going to, but only one of them has to survive to continue on the species for the next season. And you know, you got to remember they're always going to be coming in from other areas. They can smell these host plants from really far away. They're really fine-tuned. Yeah, I wish I had the more you can do. I don't know what the minimum is though, to plant. So sorry.
no, that's all right. Say just like say growing up,
Yeah, it's
I've been around insects all my life. But
yeah.
there used to be, you could walk down any railroad track and see 20 different species of butterflies in the air.
Yeah. I mean, how many?
You rarely see, like, try and find a buckeye anywhere, you know.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they definitely have their areas that they're heavier populated, and that's why our natural areas are really important to still maintain invasive species out of there and promote the native diversity. Yeah, I mean, as much as you can do is better than nothing. But I mean, you got to think too, one caterpillar or one beetle, like they can lay hundreds of eggs. So, I mean, I don't remember what the monarch is. I think it's like 300 or something eggs that one adult can lay. So I mean, they're meant to have high casualty. Maybe not as much as they get with human interaction and human development. But yeah, I don't have a good number. I'm sure someone is probably studying that. But yeah, I would just say as much as you can plant, and you know, I've had some people talk to me, they're like, oh, well, you plant a lot of, you know, species diversity in your projects, but are you planting enough of the same species to, you know, when a bee is foraging, they're usually foraging on one species at a time. So that's where boosting up your numbers of one plant species can also support that bumblebee, because they're going to look for all the bergamot. And once all the bergamot, they're not going to go to a coneflower. They're going to go to find more bergamot. And that's the plant evolution of having good pollination too. So thinking about that, but that's why we just need more people to plant native plants. So talk to your neighbors, get more people involved.
Let's take this last question.
Not a question,
Okay.
but an observation.
Yeah.
So I'm an island in a sea of poison green, and I have been for years. And a lot of people walk in my neighborhood, and I'm out there all the time, and I get the side eye all the time. Like my yard looks like crap. So I decided, I certified my yard with the National Wildlife, and I put the sign right out in front of my yard. So now I have neighbors going by with their kids and they stop and read the sign, and I talk to people, but the sign has been the thing. Cause it's like, why does this lady have a sign in her yard? So they read it and now they're kind of like, oh, this is so cool. And so they start talking to their kids about it. And then I have a big goldenrod out by the sign. So if I'm out there, I always have the kids count how many little species of bees and bumbles and at first they're like, oh, bees. I'm like, no. I mean, my bumbles come up and drink out of the hose if I'm filling up my bird. You know, they love my cat. They stare at her, they go all around her, and she knows she doesn't swat at them.
Yeah.
Because I tell her that's a bumble, and she won't swat at it. She'll swat at a fly, but not a bumble.
Yeah.
But the sign is great. So if you live in a sea of poison like I do,
Mhm.
at least it gets people kind of thinking.
Yeah.
And I'm working on the teacher at the school. I live across the street from the school, and she had a gardening club. Well, they put in, peonies and all this stuff. So I got a hold of her and told her about how you can get funding to put in native. So I'm hoping she will.
Yeah.
Like the idea, but I told her they can come over to my yard.
Yeah. Get some free seeds and
Yeah,
stuff.
but the sign, if you need a sign.
Yeah.
Do the sign.
Yeah. So the comment was putting signage up so that people understand what you're doing and your goals. Yeah, the National Wildlife Federation has theirs where you can certify your yard and you can actually certify your whole community. Which is a thing. I have a friend who's doing that. She did it in Elm Grove, and now a lot of other neighborhoods are doing it, and it's outreach and it's education components. There's the Wild Ones has some beautiful signage. There's the Monarch Way Station signs that you can get. There's a lot of different things, and Homegrown National Park. And then one other thing that you hit on that I think is really important is getting kids involved.
The kids will nag their parents.
Yes, and I kind of
next door he's the one that mows his yard this way,
has the nice pattern.
The poison truck comes and. I don't know that. And in between my hedge, I had some milkweed growing, and his daughters asked me a couple years ago, what's this plant? And I said, well, it's milkweed. If you watch, you'll see these monarch butterflies. Well, I heard him out there going, I don't know why these weeds are along here. And the girls were like, Dad, that's milkweed. That's the only thing that monarch butterflies eat. So you get to them through their kids.
Yeah. Yes.
The kids will nag them.
Yeah.
He hasn't quit spraying poison, but.
Yeah, you gotta take your small wins. But yes, I do think, kids are the next generation. So working with schools, I kind of sometimes fear the day my kids get into school because they're gonna be like, you said that wrong. There's actually, this is not that and that is that. But yes, I've taken my daughter, I've had her hold bumblebees when it's cold and dewy in the fall, and the milkweed beetles and everything. So yes, just exposing your kids or grandkids, the neighbors' kids. Yes, I'm not as aggressive with my neighborhood as I probably should be, but I'm hoping that, sometime people will start to feel it. But you also you can't force people to change. People are afraid of change. But we do need to take our small wins, and even if it's just a small garden that someone does, or just milkweed, that they can get to stay in. And, that's why the Monarch is so great. And I'm hoping with it being listed, that it does draw more attention to that. But like I said, it's not just the monarchs. There's so much other life that needs our landscapes and needs our help.
Crazy neighbor on the other side. He told my friend, I was gone last year in the summer. He said, I'm gonna go over and spray all those weeds in her yard.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
And my
Yes.
do you want to die? Well, she just can't handle her yard. She's like, she's handling her yard just fine. You better keep your hands off.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe he was gonna come in my yard and poison my yard.
Yeah, my neighbors think that my entire oak savanna present thing is a result of no mow May.
Oh, God. Well, I don't know nothing. I have no yard.
Yeah. It's education. People don't know what they don't know.
Right,
And
That's right.
it's-
Yeah.
No mow May was a good thought, I guess.
Right.
I think it's gone.
It's like
Wrong.
the weeds thing.
Yes.
Don't wanna do that.
Yeah.
And
It's,
my little neighbor has my leads all just lined up on one side of my house.
Let's see your sign, Jordan.
Well, let's give her another big hand. And there's Danielle's contact info. So now that she's not making babies right now.
Yeah.
we
Okay,
can give her
I'm gonna sign off, you guys,
For us, and she was too
thanks
busy.
for joining us online.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. The second time.
You don't want to hear about
and
chapter
how did
business,
you
right?
hear about this meeting? Anybody here first or second time?
My second.
And how did you hear about it?
I used to work at Hoffman Hollow, and so I had gotten the grant, before.
Oh, nice.
And now I don't work there and I miss this stuff and I just had a baby as well, and so I'm trying to slowly get back into this. So I'm now certified by the National Wild Ones with their sign, so.
Super, man.